Hello, BookTube. Welcome back. Welcome back to another video. My name is Glenn. This is Glenn's Bookshelf, and it's been a few days. I was very busy with some company from out of town, and did a lot of traveling, driving around, and just haven't really had time to get back to doing videos. But feeling a little restless today, and thought it was time to send out another short video. This video, I want to talk about the idea of nostalgia reading, and in particular, a certain author, Stephen King, who was, Stephen King's books were the books that really kind of got me cranking as a reader in my teens. I'm sure there were other things that I read, but somewhere along the line, I became an avid Stephen King reader and read most of his books through the 70s and 80s, but started to sort of drop off with his novels as the 1990s got going and I got into my mid to late 20s. I think probably the early 90s was when I sort of stopped keeping up with his new releases. But I wanted to talk a little bit about my experience. I want to talk about a couple of favorite books of mine from Stephen King. One that you may be pretty familiar with, and the other maybe not so much. Although you may recognize some of the movie adaptations that were made. The first book is The Stand. And The Stand was his, I don't know, Stephen King's fourth or fifth book. Came out in 1978. There was there was an extended version of The Stand that was released in, I believe, 1989. I was just doing some internet sleuthing about the years of his publications, and there was an extended version of The Stand produced in 1989 that included just not any new material exactly, but I believe it had been older material that he had written at the same time and had cut out of the book. And then in 1989, that extra content was put back in. The version that I'm holding up today is the original version, as I understand it. It's the slightly smaller version. It came out in 1978, and you may be familiar with the story. It's been turned into at least one adaptation, I think a short TV series, mini-series. There might have been a second. I think it's likely there was a second series done as well. But if you're not familiar with the story, it's the story of the background is that a highly contagious, highly deadly super flu has broken out in the United States and around the world. It wipes out about 95%, 99% of the population. I forget which figure he uses in the book. But the resulting population kind of splits into two kind of antagonistic groups. They never really quite run into each other except at the end, and that's where representatives of the sort of good group that coalesces in Boulder, Colorado, goes out to meet the bad group that is headquartered in Las Vegas. And what I think is really interesting about the book, as in most Stephen King books, are the relationships and the characters that he creates. And the most of the book focuses on the characters that coalesce in Boulder, and they coalesce around an old African American woman who has kind of sees visions and some of the characters in the book have seen visions of her, and that's what sort of brings them out to Boulder. The head of the group that's in Las Vegas, the man represented by a man that sort of leads the group, he's kind of represented as the walking man or the walking dude or the dark man. There's only a very slight, I would say, supernatural dimension to this book. Both the sort of the walking man or the walking dude who leads the group out in Las Vegas and the African American woman who leads the group in Boulder. There's some very slight kind of supernatural elements to those characters, but by and large, it's not really a traditional it's not really what most people would think of in terms of a Stephen King book as being sort of all about the supernatural and horror and everything like that. Of course, obviously, the fact that the background of the story is this deadly flu, there is that, of course, is horrific and has a horror quality about it. And there is a like I say, a slight supernatural tinge to the book with the two kind of the two characters that headline the forces of good and evil. And but the really interesting thing about it are how all these characters come together, and just the makeup of the characters that I think is just really fascinating. And I think it's really a key component of Stephen King's books. He's known as a horror writer, and I certainly wouldn't dispute that. Most of his books are about some element of the supernatural, but I really think that his writing, although it's considered sort of lowbrow or middlebrow kind of reading, I just think his characters were just so well done, and the relationships they form. One of the characters in the story is a deaf mute. Another is a sort of washed up rock singer. Another is a just sort of average Joe from Texas, and there are a few other sort of characters like this who kind of coalesce, come together, and it just makes for really very fascinating reading. And obviously, with the background of the deadly flu and people dying and how people recover, how they adapt to changes in the landscape and the environment, and how they make do with making society work again, turning the lights back on, so to speak, when nearly everyone dies. And finally, ultimately, the story comes to a conclusion that there is a confrontation between the forces of good and the forces of evil that meet in Las Vegas, and representatives of the quote-unquote good group, they go out to meet the forces of darkness and the evil one, and that's what's captured in the title of The Stand. These characters go out to confront the evil person, and they make their stand. So that even though I've read most of Stephen King's books from the 1970s and 1980s, The Stand was one of the two books that was just going away among my Stephen King favorites. The other book that I would rank along with The Stand is actually not a single book. It is a book that contains 4 novellas or short, relatively short. They're not really short stories, but they're not full-length books either. There were 4 stories. 2 of them are probably familiar to you, but the name of the book, it was released in 1978, was called Different Seasons. And that also kind of ties into a little bit with the element of the nostalgia reading, and Different Seasons kind of bringing that sensation of nostalgia, that sort of longing, that sort of remembrance, that sort of harkens back, the kind of the symbolism of seasons as representative of the types of experiences we have. Like I said, there are four novellas in the book. 2 of them are probably well known to you from the movies that were created. One was made into a movie called The Shawshank Redemption, which you probably have heard of or not seen multiple times. The name of the story in the book is called Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption. Obviously, it's about a man in prison, and he's unlawfully he had been, he's an innocent man, and he was sent to prison, and the book is about his experiences and his relationship with one of the other cons. The other story that you probably know, although it was a slightly older movie made in the 1980s, the name of the movie was called Stand By Me. In the book, it is called The Body. It's about four coming of age, not quite adolescent boys who hear about there being a dead body, whether it's another youngster, I think it is another teenager youngster, and so these boys. The story's about them, going. They want to go see this body, so they go see this body, and it was a movie that was made by Rob Reiner and got great reviews, and Will Wheaton was in it, River Phoenix, Corey Feldman, a almost unrecognizable Jerry O'Connell, and Kiefer Sutherland is in it, who plays one of the heavies, one of the bad characters in the book. But the story is really about this group of friends and their journey. There was a third novella in the book that was turned into a movie as well, although I think it might have been one of those sort of straight to video movies. It was called The Apt Pupil. It's about a teenager who he's very precocious, and he ends up realizing that there is a former Nazi guard who lives in his neighborhood and who lives a very secluded and private life, but this teenager uncovers who this man is and forms a relationship with him and grows to have a fascination. He wants to hear about what happened in the death camps and that sort of thing, and so you can sort of gather where that story is going. The fourth story is one that was not made into a movie. It was called The Breathing Method, and it's a story within a story. The larger story is about a man who is invited to be a member of this kind of reading club. It's kind of a very private, very exclusive group of older men who meet in kind of a well done brownstone in New York City, and they meet periodically, but they gather every Christmas, and at each Christmas there's a story that's told, and that part of the story is fascinating by itself, but it's also within that story there was a smaller story, and of which the title "The Breathing Method" is concerned, about a doctor and a woman, a pregnant woman who has become pregnant out of wedlock, and so the doctor is treating this woman, and the breathing method comes into play in terms of the woman giving birth. And it's the only one of the four books that has even a slight sort of supernatural aspect to it. But anyway, those two books, The Stand and Different Seasons, were by far my favorite Stephen King books. I think a little bit later I became a pretty big fan of the book Pet Sematary, but these two books were very, I read them a number of times growing up. And I kind of wanted to talk about Stephen King and the idea of nostalgia reading. I was watching a video by Randy Ray of the Literate Texan, who did kind of a list of, I think, 50 books. And one of those was a Stephen King book called The Dead Zone, which was also made into a movie starring Christopher Walken. But in his video, Randy Ray talks about kind of the idea of nostalgia reading. And so I'm just sort of, so those two elements, the Stephen King books and the idea of sort of nostalgia reading, kind of triggered my fancy, and I thought I would respond to that. I will put the link to his video down below, but I just wanted to jump on here, give you guys a quick video, and look forward to touching base with you again soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.